ground, do it now! Drop that
Get on your turn.
Down! Roll out! Do it now!
On!
Roll out! Lay down! Roll out!
He had just walked in, alone, quiet, a visitor in a new country with papers in order, an itinerary built around hospitals, and a clean, polite request for a hotel room. The camera doesn't begin with chaos. It begins in silence. A hotel lobby, one man standing near a front desk, echoes of footsteps, nothing out of the ordinary. Then it breaks, the sound of boots hitting pavement, voices, sharp. Not from behind the counter, but from outside. Not coming to help, but to corner. The footage shifts from idle space to urgency with no middle ground, multiple officers closing fast, commands already shouting, guns already up. Before words can translate, the man goes down. There's no negotiation, no misunderstanding to clear, not a single gesture asking him who he is. The moment officers yell, he's already guilty, not by action, but by appearance. There's no time for explanation, no questions about language, health, or why he's wearing what he's wearing. The body doesn't matter, the profile does. Hands slam the pavement, restraints tighten, a scarf is pulled. A ring, an object of cultural stability, used to bind the head covering, tossed away like a trinket. His hands are checked, his bag flipped. The second part of the uniform, his voice, is ignored completely. The man beneath the gear, the skin, the fabric, is Sheikh Ahmed, a UAE businessman in town for treatment. He's not loud, not chaotic, not evasive. The recording shows passivity, not peace, but restraint. Fear held tightly inside formal body language. This isn't crowd control, it's precision, and the preciseness makes it heavier. The gear, the weapons, the formation, all sharpened and deliberate. Like the training for a worst-case scenario. But that's the tragedy. This was not a worst-case scenario. It wasn't even a wrong guessing game. It was nothing. He asked for a hotel room. That's all. Back inside, where the claim originated, clerks are rewriting their tone. The story softens. The original words about shouting, phones, terrorist claims start to wobble under daylight. Suddenly it's not so certain. That's not what she meant, not what she heard. It was a feeling, a suspicion, passed from one person to another until it hit a patrol scanner with the force of a confirmed threat. The bodycam captures something most people never see, the realization that none of this was legitimate. As the officers begin to question the claim, logic returns. Suspicion peels off from fact. They realize it wasn't yelling. There wasn't an outburst. There was no allegiance sworn to anything. There was just a man asking for a place to stay, carrying 2 working phones, not disguised or hidden, but plainly in sight, and wearing his national clothing. That's it. What happened on screen wasn't about a threat. It was about how quickly power responds to fear. Not fear built from behavior, but fear built from projection. A visual fear. The training never prepared them for this. Once it becomes clear that no crime occurred, that the story has bent backward into nothing, the tension doesn't drop. It divides. Some officers' shoulders relax, others don't. Some continue searching, as if the truth might still appear with one more check of a pocket. But the man on the ground never becomes less restrained. They search in silence while repeating, relax, as if that word uncuffs on its own. But nothing about this was relaxed. The man had just undergone heart surgery in a foreign country. His hands tremble for a reason. There's confusion, not because he doesn't understand, but because he can see exactly what they believe him to be. On camera, he finally speaks, not in protest, in disbelief. Not good, he says, over and over, not good. He isn't asking for help. He's narrating what has happened and what might still happen. It doesn't take long. The damage begins to show. His voice cracks, his pulse shifts, his breath stumbles. When he collapses, nobody makes a sound for the first moment. This is not a clean arrest going sideways. This is a body buckling under something heavier than force. And then comes the second silence, the silence after the paramedics arrive. Because now the officers must explain why a tourist is lying unconscious in front of a hotel after doing nothing, and the answers aren't there. The story is too thin to hold its shape. The woman who made the call is nervous, not hateful, not visibly aggressive, but nervous enough to call her sister. The sister enough to call 911. The spiral begins in emotions, snowballs into exaggeration, and lands in hard pavement under combat gear. No officer checked the source before flexing ready drills. No one questioned how hearsay became a tactical operation. Because once fear is typed into CAD screens, it turns blue, official, and becomes a target. The The fullness of that failure plays out in half sentences from behind the desk. I didn't say that. I didn't hear that myself. I just felt uncomfortable. The officers say they're frustrated. They say they walked into a room expecting danger they never found. But that danger was built up by the design of this system to always move toward escalation, never against it. Because a calm conversation inside isn't actionable. But a terrified dispatcher's version of screaming and ISIS marks a checkbox. And so, we watch this man kneeling on American sidewalks, not flanked by speeches or protest signs, but cuffs and commands, and confusion about why the country he came to for healing now sees him as a problem. The video doesn't show hatred, that's why it lingers. It shows something worse, overconfidence surrounded by unexamined fear, all stitched into official procedure. The room is quieter now. The body is still on the pavement, the rush of commands fades, the urgency doesn't leave completely, but it changes direction. It no longer moves outward, it turns inward because there's nothing left to detain, no threat to pursue, only a problem to explain. This is the moment most bodycam footage never shows clearly, the moment when the officers realize they acted with total authority and zero foundation. No officer runs, no one panics, but you can hear it in how they talk to each other, the way their voice is steady, the tone softens. That's not de-escalation, that's recalibration. They're trying to line up their decisions with the facts they now understand. The facts that should have mattered 6 minutes ago, now they matter only in hindsight. One officer quietly repeats what the front desk clerk said. It's vague, hollow. She was nervous, nothing more. Her fear didn't come from something said. It came from what she saw, a man in cultural dress, 2 phones, calling someone in a language she didn't understand. That's it. That's what was passed forward. The day before, it might have meant nothing, but not today. Not with the weight people carry when fear becomes visual. Not when one call transmits suspicion louder than evidence ever could. And while the man lies on the ground, panting hard, barely coherent, some of those same officers who shouted him down begin to say words like unfortunate or not what we expected. That shift matters. Because it isn't about redressing trauma, it's about insulating themselves from accountability. No one says directly that the equipment came out early, that the judgment was reactive, that the man on the ground should have never been in cuffs. They say it sideways, softly, through apologies that aren't really apologies. Phrases like, it shouldn't have happened this way, already placing the blame somewhere else, into the fog of misunderstanding, into words like miscommunication or misperception. But the footage is clean, it doesn't skip, it doesn't mislead. The reality is right there in frame after frame. A calm man, involved in no crime, rushing nowhere, met by a team of geared up officers who descend as if the uniform justifies the intensity. And when it breaks bad, they act surprised, not regretful, not reflective, surprised. This is where the machine shows its design. Everything about this system prepared them for confrontation. The call comes in panicked, they arrive panicked. Everything rushes into a single shape, form a circle, clear the area, command control. That's training. But what was left out of that training was discernment. There was no question asked at the door, not even a hesitation. And that's the core of the failure, because once the cuffs go on and the scarf comes off, options disappear. Once force is applied, the machine doesn't unwind, it hides, behind papers, behind statements, behind bureaucracy. And what you see next on video is not an attempt to fix, it's an attempt to reframe. They use phrases like, it's complicated and we got bad information. That's the new tone. Not accountability, just distance from the problem. Meanwhile, the man is half conscious and saying little. He's not demanding justice, he's trying to survive the moment. This wasn't a man who sparked confrontation, this was a guest. And no one present seemed to remember that. For someone like Sheikh Ahmed, who arrived in the United States for medical care, the last thing expected was this kind of crisis. But it happened anyway. And when it did, the harm wasn't just physical, it was economic, it was reputational, it was international. Because this wasn't basic profiling, it was geopolitical mishandling. And it played out in real time across federal law enforcement systems and diplomatic channels the moment officers realized who they had. That's when phrases like embassy, international guest, UAE begin appearing in the background of the audio. There's a noticeable shift, less a concern for the man's dignity and more concern for the consequences of detaining the wrong man. That fear moves fast. It's not the kind of fear that precedes violence, it's the kind of fear that follows realization. What the public never sees are the internal signals this incident triggered, the instant assessments, the rapid risk calculations. Someone in that room is thinking about headlines, about lawsuits, about pensions. That's what changes next. The power turns from presence to preservation, but for Ahmed, the shift comes too late. From the moment he was thrown to the ground, the image was already formed. A respected businessman recovering from heart surgery, now sitting disoriented in a cold parking lot in a country that claims to protect civil freedoms. And the price of those minutes? It spreads under the surface, half-heard comments about stress, mentions of dizziness, and then he collapses. The worst kind of escalation isn't visible. It arrives in the body, in the chest, behind the eyes. The paramedics are already there, but now the tone shifts again, urgently clinical. Now there's CPR talk, pain, elevation, the scarf broken, the breath shallow. And here's where everything converges, not just violation of rights, but health compromised, plans derailed, image ruined. The lie from the front desk, which shifted through a chain of reactions, ends with a man gasping and almost unconscious as medics gather around and officers begin to look elsewhere. The officers don't narrate this failure, they don't speak it, but they wear it. Headsets lower, voices calm, bodies step backward. No one wants to say the thing they now know is true. They got it wrong, they all got it wrong. But still, there's one more action left. Apologies start to come, not to Ahmed, but later, to the camera, to the press, to the paperwork. Voices say they never meant harm, that the man was fine, he was released, that nothing criminal happened. But the damage isn't legal, it's psychological, it's global. One man, one misplaced fear, a ripple that turned into humiliation that crossed borders. And for every second the video stays public, this isn't just an incident of local misconduct. It's an image that will hang over every diplomatic desk for years to come. That's the weight. There is no training that fixes that. The sirens have gone quiet, the cuffs are off, but the damage doesn't fade with time. It spreads, quiet and wide. Ahmed is no longer on the ground. He's lying in a hospital bed, surrounded not by officers, but by medical staff unfamiliar with the headlines forming outside. By the hour, the story moves further from the Cleveland suburb it started in, and by the time evening hits, it has left Ohio entirely, because this was never just about one arrest. When the UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs contacted the US Embassy, the tone shifted quickly. What had begun as a cascade of assumptions made at ground level now had to be explained at the highest levels of diplomacy. The words on the radio, "He looked like that," and "he had two phones," were no longer local. They had to answer to global scrutiny, to national reputations, to the weight of what it means when you disrespect another country's citizen before you even ask their name. This wasn't a man looking for attention. Ahmed wanted a hotel room and quiet recovery from heart surgery, but he ended up in custody, under rifles, stripped of cultural and personal dignity, and accused of being someone he never was. Despite knowing nothing about him, the officers moved as though they had certainty. That certainty is dangerous because it wasn't based on vetting, on investigation, or on confirmation. It was built on fear that flows naturally from the shape of clothing, the presence of Arabic, the number of phones in a hand. It asks no questions, it gives no space, it simply acts. And when it acts wrong, it also protects itself. Back in the Bodycam footage, the officers begin one key defensive maneuver, rewriting intent. They apologize, yes, but not for what was done. They apologize for how it looked. Words like, "it was never meant as disrespect" and "regrettable misunderstanding" appear, but never phrases like "unlawful" or "unjust" or "racially profiled." The goal isn't repair, it's distance. Distance from the action, distance from Ahmed, distance from what everyone watching the video can clearly see. But the camera doesn't leave room for distance. It stays on. It watches. It records every shift in posture, every backward step, every moment officers begin speaking to each other and not to the man they broke. There's a moment near the end when Ahmed looks up to a translator and says, very quietly, that he can see the hate in their eyes. He doesn't yell, he doesn't rise, he's not calling for justice, he's just making a personal observation. Quiet, measured, true. That's what stays with you. Not outrage, not rebellion. A just realization. And that's what authority often doesn't expect. Not force, but reflection, because reflection hits deeper and it spreads. Later, as the lawsuit forms and his condition worsens, Ahmed doesn't just speak for himself. He becomes someone who represents everyone who's ever been mistaken for a threat simply for existing differently. Airports, hotels, street corners, encounters that begin with stares and end with trauma. The public apology given by the police department reads like an institutional script. It checks boxes, but every word comes after the damage, after the international embarrassment, after the financial threat. That apology doesn't arrive during the moment. It's a reaction, not a safeguard. By the time Ahmed files a lawsuit, the narrative turns legal. What had been a body slam of fear and cultural bias now becomes a filing in federal court. False arrest, unlawful seizure, racial and religious discrimination. But the numbers don't speak emotion, they speak consequence. 200 million, that's what he asked for. And surprisingly, that's what he got, not as a verdict, but as a settlement, but quietly issued, no formal trial, closed in the shadow of what could have been greater litigation. It wasn't just Ohio police named, it included the hotel, the parent company, and the individuals who passed the false claims from ear to ear until they turned into bullets of assumption. The result? A ripple across law enforcement and hospitality sectors alike. Quiet warnings to departments and companies whose employees have never been trained to recognize the difference between discomfort and danger. And to cities, a reminder that one false call can cost millions when left unquestioned. But while institutions walked away bruised, Ahmed didn't walk away at all. His condition worsened, business collapsed, projects lost. His own government advised its citizens to avoid traditional dress when traveling to the US. Not because of changing laws, but because of unchangeable perception. That's the silent legacy of encounters like this. When the camera cuts off, the damage continues, not in the courtroom, but in kitchens, in embassies, in how risk is smartly managed by those no longer willing to trust what was once believed to be safe ground, and behind it all, a system of policing that failed to challenge fear. The calls that day weren't malicious. That's what makes it harder. They were ordinary people, just doing what felt right, reporting based on instincts, not facts. People who didn't understand that what feels like suspicion under stress can become a death sentence when handed to men with guns, trained to move fast. What this incident revealed, not to lawyers, but to the world, is just how empty probable cause becomes when, driven by appearance alone. No raised voice, no suspicious object, no explicit threat, yet the full weight of the state, with armored vests and long rifles, swept into place for a man who had only stepped into a hotel lobby looking for a room. Ahmed knew none of this. He didn't know the clerk wanted him gone. He didn't know her sister, who he never met, would call police. He didn't know he was put in motion before he could speak. And when he tried to explain, when he said "not good" over and over, there were no hands reaching down, only flashlights, only commands, only disbelief that he could be both foreign and harmless at the same time. Later, a political analyst overseas would reflect on the video and call it simple. Racism. That word will be debated endlessly, picked apart, rewritten. But whatever label is applied, the truth recorded here is harder to ignore. One man was not believed, so he was broken. And now that it's over, the headlines will fade. The payment logged and forgotten by the institutions that issued it. But the man who collapsed won't forget. The hands that shook won't stop. Because memory doesn't come with a settlement. It comes with reminders, in airports, in glances, in the knowledge that even when you're a guest, even when you're silent, this can still happen. It's not the loud footage that matters, it's the quiet that follows.